So, as you can see behind me, our first lecture for the day is called Mastering the Creed, Onboarding the Player in Assassin's Creed Mirage and Valhalla's Dawn of Ragnarok. Onboarding, in this case, suggests we're going to be talking about tutorials, and I guess you'll see more. Just let me adjust this thing. Okay, so this is your presenter. I was already presented by Alex, so thank you. And yeah, I have been a game journalist. I've worn many other hats throughout my lifetime, and I am currently a senior game designer in Ubisoft SOFIA, where I work since 2016. I also love cats a lot, and while I don't really have the pointer, I hope we don't attract many of them, because it's gonna be chaos. Anyway, today's lecture, first let's go through what a tutorial is, why you use them, do we really need them, a brief history, and then let's see how all of that was applied to both Assassin's Creed Valhalla's expansion, Dawn of Ragnarok, and Assassin's Creed Mirage. I really hope we fit in the time. Okay, so first, what is a tutorial? The cliche goes, as you know, to usually check in with the Merriam-Webster dictionary. So I've done that. I'm not gonna read it for the very obvious reason that it's not really relevant to what we're gonna be talking about. So I took the liberty of making my own definition that we're gonna refer to. And that is, a tutorial is any piece of textual or audiovisual information that we use to teach the player how to play our game. So, let's see how lively the hall is. And I have a question for you all. So, show of hands, does Pac-Man have a tutorial? If you think it does, please raise your hand now. Okay, not many hands actually. Thank you. Going by the definition I mentioned earlier, just one slide earlier, yes, it does have a tutorial, and that is it. On the arcade machine's bezel, it has some text information about how to play the game. The question is why? Why does it have it? Isn't it intuitive enough? Isn't it easy to figure it out by yourself? Maybe. But at the time, keep in mind this is 1980, there wasn't another game like that. A lot of people didn't know how to play a game like that, so an instruction such as this one was pretty much imperative. And this is how games used to explain things back then, mostly through text. Text on an arcade machine, text in a leaflet, text in a manual. When we go to home consoles, then we move on a few generations of consoles, and what we see is starting to teach player through use of level design. Pardon me. You might have seen this particular screen of Super Mario Bros. 1 being shown as a masterclass of teaching the player through level design, and it is. But I'm not going to go through it because time. In any case, 2 generations later, we start seeing more and more ways that games are trying to teach their players how to play them, and button prompts in-game, breaking the fourth wall, as well as NPCs that give you instructions or through dialogue and stuff like that. Things and methods we still use today, by the way. Another generation later, and it's the Wild West. Everyone realizes that manuals are not enough, and maybe we should get a bit more creative with how we teach players. So what happens is we see a lot more text inside games. We see training levels or tutorial levels which are usually at the very beginning of the game and showcase every single game mechanic there is in the game, and that kind of makes the rest of the game feel like it's an exam. Like you've gone through the lecture in the first level and the rest of it, you were being tested if you understood it, which is something that we're trying to avoid since a generation later. But also, one more thing, very important thing, we start seeing limiting 3Cs as a method of teaching the player. And 3Cs, do I have to explain what it is? Okay, controls, camera, character. So in this particular screenshot, we see our main character. He's limited, he cannot move. The only thing that the player can do really at this point is to move the camera, because we're trying to teach them how. So using 3Cs and limiting 3Cs, in this case, is how we teach the player that. Okay, we move on a generation, and this is actually where we kind of stand today, because all of those methods I've shown you before, we see them now in every game. I'm using AC2, Assassin's Creed 2 for several reasons, one of which is this. Button prompts, text, images, icons, quest objectives, dialogue, everything tells you how you need to play the game, how you can play the game. And another thing, because all of this happens very gradually through the first two sequences of the Assassin's Creed 2, well, not only are the characters and the world and the main conflict introduced narratively, but also all the core game mechanics that the player needs to acquire and master, which are movement and parkour, stealth, social stealth, combat, and so on. And those first two sequences and that gradual introduction of core mechanics through gameplay and through narrative, that's what we're going to call onboarding. And this is why I'm showing it to you. Whew. Okay. So far, so good. And then the question is always, when you make a game, what do we tutorialize? Because if we show everything, and if we teach the player constantly, and if we constantly tell them what to do and where to go, they call it a hand-holding. So we need to be a bit more careful with what we do. So those are my three main points. Those are mine, my own, but I share it to you all and you can use them. So what do we tutorialize? First and foremost, controls. Why controls? If the players cannot control your game and don't know how to interact with it, that's not okay. Second, core mechanics. Core mechanics are pretty much every feature, every way of interacting with the game that the player needs to acquire, master, and know to be able to finish the game. And finally, exotics or exotic gameplay. That's everything that's too far removed from the core features and might happen once in the game or maybe later in it and so on, or maybe we change the rules. Instead of running forward, we run towards the screen, stuff like that. And there is another method. It's not something I came up with. It's very commonly used in video games and in industry in general. You may find it in different, named in different ways, but this is what I want to show you because we're going to have a lot of examples later. So this is the teach, test, trial method, as I call it, or 3T. And basically this is a good way to introduce core mechanics especially. So what is teach? We show the player what to do or how to do it, or we tell them, or we guide them through it, and we teach them in a safe environment. What is a safe environment, you might ask? It's a situation where the player is not in any fatal danger and they can make mistakes without having to go back too far back. Then we test. First we teach, then we test. The test can come immediately after, it can come a bit later, but ideally it should be a very similar situation to the teach setup. So the player can recognize what they need to do, how, and apply how to do it based on what we've taught them already. So this is the the test moment. And finally, and this could be a bit later, but ideally not too far into the game, trial. Make sure that the player has understood the mechanic, how to interact with the game, what we've taught them, what we've tested, in a kind of different situation. So they can apply what they've learned. It's like mathematical equations, you know? Okay, before we finish with this introductory section, I want you to focus on these takeaways. If you don't remember anything else from it, those are the three things that I kind of want you to take away from this. So, games always had tutorials in one way or another. A piece of text could be enough, it had that. Tutorializing what is needed, when is needed, is ideal, and gradual onboarding is way better than just having a tutorial or training level in the beginning, especially if your game is longer or more complex. Teach, test, trial for core feature is a good cheat, if you will, or a good method to achieve that, to achieve the gradual tutorialization and make sure that players will memorize and apply what they've learned better. And now we go to the meat of the presentation, as one would say, tutorializing Assassin's Creed Valhalla Dawn of Ragnarok. So in this section, particular section, I'm going to talk about this expansion, the third one, of Assassin's Creed Valhalla, which is the Viking iteration of Assassin's Creed. Ubisoft SOFIA had the pleasure of collaborating with Ubisoft Montreal and a lot of other studios on Valhalla, and we also developed as a lead studio this expansion, Dawn of Ragnarok. So, how many of you have played Dawn of Ragnarok? Okay, I see some hands, so I think I need to recap a little bit what happens in that game. So, I'll try to keep it short in the interest of time, but basically in Dawn of Ragnarok, you play as Odin, the Norse god Odin, and you help the dwarves of the world of Svartalfheim, which are being invaded by the fire giant, this fire giant, Surtur, and his army of fire and ice giants, we call Muspels and Jotnars, and the main mechanic and the main thing that makes Dawn of Ragnarok stand out is that the dwarves give you a bracer we call the Huggerrip, which allows you to take the powers of those giants, of Surtur's army, and apply them. And those powers are usually magical stuff like walking on lava and freezing time, flying as a raven, and stuff like that. So, this is the important part. You'll see why it's important a little bit later. Now, as I said, when we start making a game, first thing we need to establish what do we need to tutorialize. And when working on Dawn of Ragnarok, we did just that. We had a feature list, and eventually we did a short list of the most important features that are, in this case, core features for the expansion, but for Valhalla, they're kind of exotic in a way. So, those are them. Odin powers, dwarven shelters, Mjolnir raids and upgrade weapon, collectibles or activities are secondary. Then, there was another wrinkle, because Dawn of Ragnarok was meant to be experienced in different ways. You could play it as an expansion to the main game. You can start from your settlement in England, or you can play it as a standalone without ever going back to England and starting it from the main menu. The thing here is that we needed to accommodate both of those scenarios, to make sure that players eventually reach gift to the god, which is our actual onboarding, with the same knowledge or at least on similar level of understanding. And this was very important, accommodating those two types of players. As you can see in the rescue, which is the dream sequence that happens and that introduces the story, there are no tutorials, but we did scale everything to the player's level to make sure, again, that there is this level of difference is not that significant. Why no tutorials? Why did we decide on no tutorials? Well, Assassin's Creed Valhalla had the benefit of having the codex. And the codex is a menu which houses every single tutorial that the player has seen, and also information about the world, the characters, and historical facts. So in this case, instead of repeating the base movement and base combat and base controls tutorials, we had a message that just referred players to the codex in case they wanted to review them, if they already played Valhalla, or learn about them in this case. So, accommodating many types of players. So, how did we approach this as developers? Now, it was a two-pronged approach, and it has one word that is very, very important for both sides, which is collaboration. So, on one hand, we had live documents, and that documentation was used not only as design, one spot for design, but also for making changes, making requests, tracking implementation, stuff like that. And this was one side of the thing, but the other was collaboration with question level designers to make sure that everything we want to teach the player, especially during the onboarding, is sequenced properly and is supported by cutscenes, by the narrative, by the level design. You'll see how, I hope, in a little bit. But before we do that, there's two more points. One of them is to know what we had to work with, because I'm going to be using some terminology, and I really need to introduce that terminology to you. So, this mockup has 4 UI, user interface modules, which are the most commonly used to relay information to the player. So, one of them, contextual controls, we're going to call them contextual controls. They could be button prompts, action prompts, whatever you want, but for the purposes of this exercise, we're going to call them contextual controls. Those, well, show the player how to control the game. And they can be static on the screen, as you can see here, or they can be attached to pretty much any object in the world. Their use and why we use them, I think I don't have to explain. This is the second thing, critical message. We use this traditionally for warnings and error messages, but also when we want the player to do something right now, because it could be essential to teaching them, it could be essential to their health or enjoyment of the game, and you can usually see stuff like your health is low, press this button to heal. And this, as you can understand, is pretty important because we show it when their health is critical. Now this is an AFS message. AFS means Animus Feedback System, and it's called like that because in universe, in the Assassin's Creed games, those messages are usually written by whoever is the Animus operator, which is why in the present day segments you usually don't see those. They can have an image if we want, if we decide that we need to illustrate what's being taught or told, but they can just be a block of text. In any case, those are used for brief, very brief messages that explain basics or to remind players how to use something or to give them a suggestion. That's it. They stay on screen however long we like. The default is 7 seconds. And in the case of Mirage, we actually measured the text and how long should it stay to be comfortably read. Finally, we have the post panel behind me, and that is something we use very sparingly because it pauses the game. And pausing the game is something we try to avoid because it kind of breaks the flow. And if it happens in a very tense situation, like maybe fighting a boss or something, it could be frustrating. So we try to avoid them as much as we can, but we use them usually when we have to explain or introduce something that's a bit more complicated, that needs a video, because we can have a video file here, or to prevent player errors, because sometimes in Valhalla, for example, when your stamina runs out for the first time, you get this, because you need to know what happened and how to recuperate from that. So, again, to reiterate, contextual controls, critical messages, AFS, and post panels. You'll see them a lot in a little bit. Okay. And now, that section of Dawn of Ragnarök, that onboarding scheme that I showed you earlier, all of that takes an hour. And that mission that I called onboarding, Gift to the Gods, takes about half an hour. That's for context. And we're going to go through that mission a little quick to show you what we did and why we did it. Okay, so the story here is that stuff happened and the two dwarves find us and promise us a gift. And we're going through a cave and they're leading us to that gift. So what we see first is a Muspel giant looking for something, maybe the gift, maybe not. And we have to kill them for the dwarves to proceed. After that happens, they give us the gift, and that is the aforementioned Hugger Rib Bracer. And then we have to teach the player how to use it, right? So because that is used to take powers away from enemies, and from Muspel and Jotnar giants in particular, this is what we did. So we have a critical message, we have a contextual control. That's very clear. The critical message does not disappear until the player does the action, or goes a little bit away because we don't want to be that obnoxious. When they do the action, what happens is we have a special version of the post panel that cannot be disabled or closed or cancelled. As you can see, that explains what the power is and what its utilities are, as well as this specific UI element that makes you, as a player, have to choose which slot of the available ones on the Hugger Rib you assign the power to. So there is player action involved. The players cannot just skip this step. They have to take conscious action. Then, because we need to teach, now that we have the tool, we do it through level design, and not only. But it's a bit dark, for which I apologize, but this is the teaching moment. So the power we just got is Power of Muspelheim, and Power of Muspelheim allows you to become a Muspel giant for a little bit, for a time, and walk on lava, and that's its main utility. So to teach that, we have the following scenario. So we have the two dwarves here at a locked door, and then we have a crevice the player can go through and should go through, which is lit up, as you can see, with daylight. And in this case, the player must go through the lava, through the crevice, and go to the other side and unlock the door. And that's how we teach them how to use the power. But to really hammer it down, the dwarves explain all of that to you through dialogue. We also have an objective, which suggests finding another way, and we have a critical message at the right time, which tells you how to activate the power. Now, each power uses this resource we call Hugger. I hope you can see it, the bar down there. And it's very important to know that Hugger can be gained in 3 ways. So, killing enemies gives you Hugger. Interacting with a specific type of flower, which gathers Hugger, gives you Hugger. And Finally, a shrine. A specific type of shrine lets you sacrifice half of your health and refills your hunger bar. But this is the resource we use. What do we do, though, if the player has already triggered the power of Muspelheim before we told them to? Well, we have safety. We have this shrine nearby with some healing mushrooms, because players need to sacrifice half of their health to use it. And in that way, we kind of give them a little bit of safe environment, at least, well, the most you can do in a lava-filled cave. Then, what happens is, okay, we open the door, we get reintroduced to the shrine if we haven't before, and we have the test. We taught the player, now we need to test their understanding of how the power works. So, very similar scenario, that here is a hole, and that is a locked door. So, literally swapping it. Very similar situation. When they do that, we introduce them to second way. They can gather huger, which are the huger blooms, those flowers I mentioned before. And then we have the trial. And the trial, in this case, is still going through lava to push a boulder so the dwarves can jump over the gap. And again, we do that through dialogue, we do that through quest objectives, but still we let the player figure it out for themselves instead of just putting post panels or maybe critical messages on screen. Finally, we exit the cave and the dwarves suggest the second usage of the power of Muspelheim, which is blending in with other Muspels. And we can do that, we can opt to not do that. In any case, this is up to the player, and what we have then is introducing the Muspel alarms. I'm not gonna go too much into that, but basically that's another mechanic that we deemed to be important, because when you go into a location with Muspels, they can trigger an alarm which can spawn reinforcements, and we show in cutscene all of those reinforcements so you know how they look like. And then we need to get to the Dwarven Shelter. So, Dwarven Shelters are a curious mechanic, because they're essentially where dwarves hit after Surtur invaded. And because they kind of wanted to keep them secret, even from one another, what they have is this method of signposting where they are, where the entrance is. And you can see this signpost on this object here, which is a barrel. So this yellow rune that points towards the entrance. But that's the thing. The dwarves for us opened the map in this case, and they've given us a rough whereabouts of where the shelter should be. And also we see where we are, so we get a picture of how big the radius is in which we should look for those runes that I showed you earlier. And eventually we go to the shelter and we are granted some silica. This is silica, and this is the resource we use to upgrade the Hugrip. And to make sure that the players know what they use it for, we point them with an objective to the nearest blacksmith. That's the blacksmith right there, and we have a post panel which explains how to gather more silica. With all that done, we have title review. We have this big Assassin's Creed Valhalla Dawn of Ragnarok epic music. It's awesome. If you haven't experienced it, please do. And then we unleash the player in the world. And that's it. We leave them to discover all the rest of the features and powers by themselves and experiment and guide them only when we need to do it. So, before we move on to Mirage, I just want to show you another thing, because I had the pleasure to actually write the texts for these tutorials, both in Dawn of Ragnarok and Mirage. I want to share with you something that is brief instructions, in this case, hints in the other case. You want to go for brief instructions in the case of core mechanics and controls, and for hints for secondary things. Now, the takeaways, again, this one. Second, collaborate. Collaboration is a good thing. And you'll see why. And try to accommodate many types of players as much as you can. In this case, we had, with Dawn of Ragnarök, the 2 ways you can experience the expansion. So, Expedition to Baghdad is how the next part is called. And now, after Dawn of Ragnarök, we had the pleasure of collaborating with Ubisoft Bordeaux on Assassin's Creed Mirage. And Assassin's Creed Mirage is a very particular game because, very curious game, because it had the mission of going back to the roots of Assassin's Creed and paying tribute to everything that came before. So, how did we achieve that? We worked with Ubisoft Bordeaux and established an extension of what we did for Dawn of Ragnarök. And in this case, we had live documentation, 2.0 we called it, which included a bit more wireframes and planning. Also, tutorials and introduction of mechanics and onboarding was included in part in planning the quests and the narrative and everything else. And finally, 8 out of 30 user tests that we did for Assassin's Creed Mirage included testing on player understanding of onboarding and tutorials, which was very crucial because it gave us a lot of feedback. So, another thing, we had a lot of inspiration to draw from Assassin's Creed games and through history, if you will. And you'll see some of that examples later. But, okay, so I told you earlier that the Dawn of Ragnarök onboarding takes 30 minutes to an hour. This here is the onboarding of Mirage, and it takes between 2.5 hours and 4 hours, depending on how you play. It has Basim, our main character, go from a street thief to an established hidden one, as the assassins were called back then. And the only thing I want to show you on this slide is that we have a lot of skill tests, how we call trials then. So we teach, we test, we trial a lot. And now, this is the final part. I really hope we're not too short on time. In any case, here we're gonna go through certain parts of the onboarding so I can show you some neat tricks that we did. First and foremost, when starting the game, the first thing the player needs to do, Basim is a street thief here, the first thing the player needs to do is move and follow their childhood friend Nehal. We don't tell them how to, unless they don't move for 5 seconds. If they can't figure it out for 5 seconds, contextual controls. That's it. Accommodating many types of players. Now, moving on, we have the NPC, Nehal in this case, showing us, because monkey see, monkey do is another thing that I recommend, by the way, for teaching the player. If you show them something that they can figure out by themselves, it's also a good way to teach a mechanic. And in this case, we have a combination of both this and contextual controls, both on screen and in the world, attached here on the corner. Basim and Nehal reach a market, a crowded market, and because a thief's prerogative is actually poking into people's pockets, we need to teach them how to do that. Pickpocketing was a very special case because pickpocketing in Mirage happens through a minigame. A minigame which requires precise input, so you need to press a button at a certain time. So that's why we had a looping video in the post panel, and that's why we have post panel, which triggers when the player is in range for the pickpocketing action, but not after they've entered it. And that's the minigame. Now, then, because we already showed parkour, then we test the parkour. And this is the test. We only introduce new elements that the player might have not seen before, like the zip line, in this case, or the pole vault. Then we get to our employer, the dervish, and we get a new mission to steal a shipping ledger from the docks in Ambar, and we make the player safe in a cutscene. As you can see, the Basim is in the bushes. And this is where we're going to teach detection, the basis of stealth. So we got inspired from Origins a lot here. And what we did was a very scripted sequence where the guard notices you, but you're still in the bushes, but not crouched, so you're not really hidden. We have this post panel exactly to prevent detection, and we limit the 3 Cs in a way that the only button that's active for the player at this time is the crouch button, which you can see behind me. And then when the player presses the crouch button, they crouch, and the guard, let me see, okay, and the guard goes towards us, and in the moment he's starting to detect us, we prevent that by another post panel, which again, limiting the 3 Cs to only the button that needs to be pressed. In this case, assassination or knocking out, because Basim is still a street thief, he does not have a weapon. Then, in this case, we have a test, an optional test immediately, a guard turned with his back towards us. We can engage with him, we cannot, if we don't want to. Anyway, mission successful, we go back to Dervish, and we meet Rushan, who is one of the mentors of the Hidden Ones. And then we get the idea of impressing the Hidden Ones by stealing something from the Caliphal Palace. And to make sure, because this is now the trial for both parkour and stealth, and seeing what player understood, we have this dialogue option. Mirage doesn't have a lot of dialogue options. There is sparingly. In this case, it's to confirm they understand that we are... Whew. Okay. We've hit time, by the way, almost. But in any case, we need them to understand that, yeah, no going back. So we test stealth and detection, as mentioned. We introduce some stuff contextually. Mission successful. And then whatever happens, happens. I'm not going to spoil it for you. But Basim needs to run, essentially, from pretty much all the guards in Ambar because of that. And this is the test for how they understood parkour, because they need to get away now. Finally, because detection and stealth is, again, not just detection, we have contextual critical messages in AFS for when they manage to escape the guard's vision and they stop searching for them, to explain what happened. Again, tutorializing what needs to be tutorialized when it needs to be. Then stuff happens, Basim gets recruited into the Hidden Ones and his training starts. I'm gonna skip this one in the interest of time. But then another neat trick, when Basim gets his weapons, his dagger and sword, what happens is that he also gets a tool, his first tool, the throwing knife, and we have an optional tutorial here. Which is cool because what we did here is if you interact with the NPC, that needs to, that teaches you how to throw the throwing knives. We have this AFS which suggests how to equip the tool you just got. And this AFS stays on screen until the player equips their throwing knives. If they equip their torch, for example, it doesn't go away. It requires the throwing knives. We have another test of parkour, and then we teach combat. And combat, pretty simple, by the way, just contextual controls on screen and tracking what we teach the players through quest objectives. And then we have the test immediately, during which we show all the controls, all the mechanics you learned until now to make sure you understand them and you have a reference if you didn't. And then we return to Baghdad. We have 2 more mechanics here that I want to go through, and I'll try to do that really quick. But this is where the player is unleashed in the open world and they have full freedom. But we're still in onboarding. He's not still an assassin yet, right? So This is when we trigger the wanted level system, or the notoriety system, as we call it in Assassin's Creed, and it's contextual. The first time the player does one of 17 possible actions that are counted as illegal, this shows up telling them, okay, now the guards are going to be after you. After they reach a certain threshold, this post panel shows up again to make sure that the player isn't killed while we explain it to them. And this tells them how to decrease their notoriety. Then we have contextual, again contextual, only when we need to tutorialize AFSs for both ways of decreasing notoriety. One is the wanted posters. You can see Basim ripping one here. And this is the Munadi, which is who you need to pay for lowering your notoriety, but they lower it all the way down. Finally, we rescue the leader of the Zanch rebellion from prison, and then the test. If the player must have kind of interacted with the notoriety system until now, but even if they haven't, we show them the post panels now, and we point them to both wanted posters and Munadi to make sure they understand how to lower their notoriety. And this is an objective now. They have to engage with it. Finally, this is Basim's first true test, his first target. And I'm not going to spoil what happens and how to approach it, but after he kills the target, we have the final part of the onboarding, which is the assassin's focus. Because Basim himself is not entirely a historical figure. He's a bit supernatural in war. He has this ability of chain assassinating really fast a number of enemies. And the war explanation of doing that is that the animals cannot render his movements because they're so fast. But how do we show that in game? How do we show his first usage of this ability? Well, we did a lot of going back and forth, and we ultimately achieved the sequence I'm going to show you now by listening to players from user tests. And listening to feedback and applying that feedback and iterating on it is something that I really want to emphasize for you guys. So, we have a post panel immediately after. Through 3 Cs, the player can only press the Assassin Focus trigger button, nothing else. When they do, they enter a special version of the Assassin Focus, which cannot be cancelled, cannot be exited, and they have to mark their 2 targets that are in front of them. When they do, as you can see, we have a preview of the animation that's going to play and the direction that Basim is going to go. And then we have the assassination itself. And finally, to really make sure that we acknowledge that this is a little bit fantastic, we have Basim being confused about what happened because he himself does not understand it completely. He kind of does by the end of the game. Anywho, those are the takeaways from this particular section that I kind of want to impart to you. So, when in doubt, feedback. Listen to feedback. Player feedback, if you can do user tests. Peer feedback, give it to someone who hasn't worked on it, to play it, to give you honest feedback. Listen, just listen, don't tell them they're playing it wrong. That's very important when gathering feedback. And then react to player actions and inactions when possible. This is a continuation of accommodating different types of players. So as you saw, we give them the freedom and we only show tutorials when we have to. Contextualizing via narrative and better immersion is my message, because when you contextualize stuff, like what we did in Mirage was having Basim as a street thief. He doesn't have weapons. Why doesn't he have weapons? Because he's a street thief. Then we gradually introduce mechanics through narrative and through level design and through tutorials and stuff and gameplay situations. So this helps immersion. Do it when you can. Whew! Looking at the time.
So we have time for a couple of questions. If you want to ask a question, raise your hand, and I am going to give you a mic. You can ask it, and then Diane will answer it. Hands? Anyone? There's a question there.
I have a
All
question
right.
there. That was adrenaline-inducing. Thank you, guys.
Hello. Thank you. My question is, when is too much how do you avoid giving too much information to the player with all these pop-ups on the screen? I'm giving you an example in Dead Space, the original. The game, first of all, gives you a diegetic tutorial with how you should deal with enemies. You should dismember them, and it shows you that you should cut off their limbs with bloody...
That's done through mostly visual language and writing on the wall and stuff like that. It's a little bit more immersive, yes, I know what you're referring to.
But later in the game, actually, it gives you a prompt with the in-game UI. It pops up telling you you can dismember enemies, and later a character also mentions it. Do you think that is because many players missed the first signs of how you should deal with enemies, or is it a case of too much babying the player?
I don't believe in babying, I'm sorry. But the 3-team method suggests that, okay, we teach, we test, we trial. In the case of Dead Space, maybe showing the player instead of telling them is the teach, but they make sure that the player understood when it's really necessary. So this kind of combines both the test and the teach moment. And then we get the trial, as you know. I'm not going to go into details for Dead Space, but I believe that having a secondary way to make sure that the player understood the mechanic is always good. I don't think it's babying. There are many types of players, and you need to accommodate as much as you can. Because, yeah, that's my stance.
Thank you.
All right.
Other questions? Do we have?
One more question. I know, Bobby, I see you. One more question. I'm
really
responsible
sorry,
for
guys.
this.
For not leaving you too much time for that.
Hi, and thank you for this great talk.
Thank you.
So my question is, since players nowadays tend to not have too much time to play and tend to forget mechanics, for example, if they don't play the game for a month, do you believe we need tutorials to reinforce if we detect that the player is not behaving correctly or forgot the controls or forgot the mechanics? Do you believe this could be a possible future where games actually show you tutorials again in certain situations?
We do reminders in Assassin's Creed games for very important features, but that's situational. What we do have, as I mentioned earlier, and that's why we chose to not have basic controls in Dawn of Ragnarok, Sintro, is we have the codex, and the codex is a place where a menu actually, when you can reference everything, every control. So if you haven't played the game for 2 months, 3 months, a year, and you have forgotten how to control it or how something works, you can refer to the codex. Maybe having a suggestion, if we detect that, to the player that, okay, you can refer or reference the codex if you forgot how to play, maybe that's a good idea, actually. But it's, again, accommodating many times of players. Best thing you can do.
All right. Round of applause for Jan Korolev.
Thank you, guys.